The gunshot echoed across the vast, open plains as Rebecca Wilson clutched her swollen belly and urged her exhausted mare forward. April 1875 had brought an unusually warm spring to the Wyoming Territory, but the heat was the least of her worries. 3 days on the run from her late husband's brother had left her parched, famished, and desperate. The horse beneath her stumbled, nearly sending her tumbling to the ground. "Just a little further, girl," Rebecca whispered, her throat dry as the dusty trail ahead. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. At 7 months pregnant and newly widowed, the world had become a terrifying place. As dusk settled over the rolling landscape, she spotted smoke rising in the distance. A ranch, perhaps, or a small homestead. Her heart quickened with both hope and dread. Strangers could mean salvation or further danger. With little choice, she guided her mare toward the plume of smoke. As she approached, she could make out a modest cabin with a small corral beside it. A man moved about outside, tending to something near a campfire. Rebecca stopped her horse at a cautious distance. "Hello there," she called, her voice cracking from thirst. The man turned, hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. He was tall and weathered, with dark hair peeking out from beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His face, partially obscured by several days' growth of beard, seemed to relax slightly at the sight of her. "Evening, madam," he replied, tipping his hat. His eyes traveled to her pregnant belly, then back to her face. "You look like you could use some help." Rebecca's hands tightened on the reins. "I need water for my horse and myself, perhaps a place to rest for the night." She hesitated. "I can pay." "No need for payment." He gestured toward the cabin. "I've got plenty of water, some stew on the fire, and a roof that doesn't leak much." Despite his seemingly kind offer, Rebecca remained on her horse. The man approached slowly, hands visible. "Name's Zachary Moore," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "Most folks call me Zach." Rebecca nodded stiffly. "Rebecca Wilson." "You're welcome to stay the night, Mrs. Wilson." "I was just about to have supper." Rebecca studied him, weighing her limited options. The baby gave a strong kick, as if urging her to accept the offer of food and shelter. "I don't trust strangers, Mr. Moore," she finally said, one hand protectively covering her belly. The cowboy's weathered face softened into something resembling a smile. "Then I'll earn it," he replied simply. "Starting with watering your horse and not asking questions you don't want to answer." Something about his straightforward manner eased her anxiety slightly. Rebecca reluctantly dismounted, wincing as her swollen feet touched the ground. Zachary approached slowly and took the reins. "This old girl looks ready to drop." "How long have you been riding?" "3 days," Rebecca admitted, following him toward the water trough. He let out a low whistle but asked nothing further as he tended to her exhausted mare. True to his word, he asked no intrusive questions as he showed her to a crude wash basin where she could clean her face and hands before supper. The stew was simple beans, venison, and wild onions, but to Rebecca, it was the finest meal she'd had in days. They ate in relative silence, the crackling fire and distant coyote calls providing the only soundtrack to their meal. "Where are you headed?" Zachary finally asked, refilling her tin cup with coffee. Rebecca stared into the dark liquid. "Nowhere specific. Away." He nodded as if that were answer enough. "Running from something or someone." Her eyes snapped up to meet his. "I thought you weren't asking questions." "Just trying to determine if I need to keep watch tonight," he replied evenly. Rebecca considered lying, then thought better of it. "My brother-in-law. My husband died in a mining accident 2 months ago. His brother believes." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He believes the baby I'm carrying isn't his brother's. He's wrong, but he's not a man who listens to reason." Zachary's jaw tightened. And he's after you. He wants the deed to our claim, Rebecca said bitterly. Thomas, my husband, struck a promising vein just before the accident. Virgil thinks it should be his now. And the child, Rebecca's hand moved protectively to her belly. He said he'd see that the bastard never drew breath. Anger flashed across Zachary's face before he carefully controlled his expression. I see. He stood, gathering their empty plates. You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure something out. I can't impose. It's not an imposition, Mrs. Wilson. Just simple human decency. Rebecca wasn't sure if she believed in such things anymore, but exhaustion was quickly overcoming her wariness. Zachary showed her to his bed, a simple frame with a straw mattress, insisting she take it while he slept near the fire. What if Virgil tracks me here? She asked, hovering in the bedroom doorway. Zachary checked his revolver before setting it within easy reach. Then he'll regret it. Despite her distrust, Rebecca slept soundly for the first time in days, the simple security of four walls and a man standing guard providing more comfort than she cared to admit. She woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment, disoriented, she thought she was back in her small cabin with Thomas. Reality crashed back quickly enough. Rebecca smoothed her rumpled dress and attempted to tame her unruly red hair before emerging from the bedroom. Zachary stood at the small cook stove, turning bacon in a cast iron skillet. Morning, he said without turning. Figured you could use a proper breakfast. Hope you like your eggs fried. That's very kind, Rebecca replied, taking a seat at the rough-hewn table. But I should be moving on soon. Zachary placed a heaping plate before her, without a plan, without knowing where you're going, Rebecca bristled. I've managed just fine on my own. Is that what you call nearly collapsing from exhaustion? He sat across from her with his own plate. Eat first. Then we can talk about what comes next. The food was simple but delicious, and Rebecca found herself cleaning her plate despite her intention to maintain her independence. As she sipped her coffee, she studied her host more carefully in the morning light. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with deep-set gray eyes that missed nothing. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into his beard. "Why are you helping me?" she asked abruptly. Zachary considered her question as he poured more coffee. My ma used to say that a person's character is revealed by what they do when nobody's watching. Out here, folks help each other. It's how we survive. And what do you get in return? A flicker of amusement crossed his face. Not much trust in that heart of yours, is there? Trust is a luxury I can't afford, he nodded slowly. Fair enough. I'm not asking for anything in return, Mrs. Wilson, but I am suggesting you need a plan better than running until you drop. Rebecca couldn't argue with that assessment. What would you suggest? There's a settlement about 40 miles west of here. Pine Creek. It's small but growing. They've got a doctor which you'll be needing soon enough, and enough people that a stranger might not stand out. And Virgil, men like that, they're usually looking for easy prey. A woman alone. But a woman with a husband, he shrugged. That's a different matter. Rebecca stared at him. Are you suggesting I find a husband in this Pine Creek? I'm suggesting you find a place to have your baby safely, Zachary replied. As for the rest, that's up to you. After breakfast, Rebecca insisted on helping with the dishes while Zachary went to check on the horses. Through the window, she watched him move with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hard work and solitude. There was something comforting about his straightforward manner. When he returned, he carried a small leather-bound book. What's that? Rebecca asked. Map, he replied, spreading it on the table. Shows the trails to Pine Creek. It's not an easy journey, especially in your condition. Rebecca studied the map, tracing the route with her finger. I'll manage. Zachary's expression remained neutral. I've got business in that direction myself. Was planning to head that way tomorrow. What kind of business? Rebecca asked suspiciously. Cattle. Small herd about 10 miles from Pine Creek needs moving. He folded the map carefully. I could escort you there if you'd allow it. Rebecca hesitated, weighing her options. Traveling alone had nearly killed her once already. The baby kicked vigorously, as if voicing an opinion on the matter. Why would you do that? You don't know me. I know enough, Zachary replied. I know you're in trouble through no fault of your own. I know that baby deserves a fighting chance. He hesitated. And I know what it's like to be hunted. The last statement hung in the air between them. Rebecca wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression warned against it. 2 days' ride, he continued. We travel together, but I'll respect your privacy. Once we reach Pine Creek, you can decide what comes next. Rebecca considered his offer. Every instinct told her to be wary, yet something about this quiet, solitary man inspired a grudging trust. All right, she finally said, but I'll pay my way. I have a little money. Keep your money, Zachary said. You'll need it for the baby. They spent the remainder of the day preparing for the journey. Zachary examined Rebecca's mare, determining the animal needed at least a day's rest before attempting another long ride. He offered his second horse, a sturdy bay gelding with a gentle disposition, for Rebecca to ride instead. As evening approached, Rebecca found herself oddly comfortable in the small cabin. Zachary kept his distance, seemingly aware of her wariness, yet his presence was reassuring rather than threatening. How long have you lived out here? She asked as they shared another simple meal. 4 years, he replied. Bought this place from an old trapper heading back east. It's not much, but it suits me. No family, something flickered in his eyes. Not anymore. Rebecca didn't press further. They all had their ghosts, especially in these territories. That night, as she lay in his bed listening to the occasional creak of the floorboards as Zachary moved about, keeping watch, Rebecca found herself wondering about the man who had so unexpectedly become her protector. He was a mystery, this solitary cowboy, yet there was a reliability about him that made her feel safer than she had in months. The baby kicked again, and Rebecca placed her hand over the movement. We'll be all right, she whispered, hoping it wasn't a lie. Morning came with a clear sky promising heat. They ate a hurried breakfast before Zachary packed provisions for the journey. Rebecca insisted on helping, needing to feel useful rather than helpless. As they saddled the horses, Zachary handed her a small revolver. You know how to use this. Rebecca took the weapon, checking it with practiced ease. Thomas taught me, said a woman alone should know how to protect herself. Smart man, Zachary nodded approvingly. Keep it handy. Hopefully you won't need it. They set out as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, Zachary leading the way with Rebecca following on the bay gelding. The horse had a smooth gait that spared her the worst of the jarring she'd endured on her previous desperate journey. As the morning wore on, the landscape gradually changed from open prairie to scattered stands of pine and rocky outcroppings. They stopped at midday beside a small creek to rest the horses and eat some of the jerky and biscuits Zachary had packed. How did you end up out here? Rebecca asked as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Zachary took a drink from his canteen before answering. Came west after the war, tried my hand at a few things: mining, cattle driving, even worked as a deputy for a spell in Colorado. He shrugged. None of it suited me much. Prefer my own company most days. The war changed a lot of men, Rebecca observed. Changed everything, he agreed quietly. My husband never spoke of it, she said. He served with a Pennsylvania regiment, came back different according to his brother. We all did. Zachary's gaze seemed fixed on something far away. After a moment, he stood. We should keep moving. Want to make it to Miller's Creek by nightfall. There's good water there. They continued their journey, maintaining a pace careful enough for Rebecca's condition but steady enough to cover ground. Zachary occasionally pointed out landmarks or shared bits of knowledge about the territory, which plants were medicinal, which animal tracks to be wary of, where water might be found in the drier months. By late afternoon, Rebecca was fighting exhaustion, though she tried not to show it. Her back ached fiercely, and the baby seemed to be doing somersaults against her spine. Zachary noticed her discomfort despite her efforts to hide it. "Creek's just ahead," he said, pointing to a line of trees in the distance. "We'll stop there for the night." The campsite he chose was well sheltered, with a rocky overhang providing protection from the elements and the creek gurgling nearby. Zachary efficiently set up camp, building a small fire and arranging blankets for Rebecca to rest comfortably. "You've done this before," she observed as he prepared a simple stew from their provisions. "Done what?" "Taken care of someone." A shadow crossed his face. "Once." Again, Rebecca sensed a story there but didn't pry. Instead, she gratefully accepted the food he offered and found herself relaxing as darkness settled around them. "Tell me about Pine Creek," she said, hoping conversation might distract her from her discomfort. Zachary poked at the fire. "It's growing. Maybe 100 people now. They've got a general store, a doctor who's only half drunk most days, and a schoolteacher who came out from Boston last year. Railroad's talking about putting a spur line through, which means it'll likely get bigger." "Sounds civilized," Rebecca said with a touch of irony. "Compared to some places." He looked up at her. "They need people, especially those willing to work. A widow with a baby might find folks willing to help, or folks willing to gossip." Zachary acknowledged this with a nod. "People talk, but they also forget, given time and something new to talk about." "I don't want charity," Rebecca said firmly. "I can work. I kept books for Thomas's store back in Pennsylvania before we came west. I can sew, cook, teach basic letters." "Good skills," Zachary agreed. Pine Creek's general store owner might be looking for help. His wife died last winter, left him with the store and 2 young children. Rebecca considered this information. "You seem to know a lot about a place you don't live in." "I do business there occasionally. People talk to me." A slight smile touched his lips. "Especially when I don't talk much back." Despite her exhaustion, Rebecca found herself smiling in return. There was something disarming about his quiet honesty. "You should rest," he said, nodding toward the bedroll he'd prepared for her. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Rebecca didn't argue. As she settled onto the surprisingly comfortable arrangement of blankets, she watched Zachary move about the camp, checking the horses one last time and adding wood to the fire. "Mr. Moore," she called softly. He looked up. "Thank you." He nodded once, acknowledging her gratitude without making a fuss about it. That night, Rebecca dreamed of Thomas not as he was in the final months, consumed by gold fever and increasingly distant, but as he had been when they first married. Kind, hopeful, with plans for their future. In the dream, he smiled sadly at her and then turned away, walking into a mist that swallowed him completely. She woke with tears on her cheeks and the strange sense that something had shifted inside her. Permission, perhaps, to look forward rather than back. The morning brought heavy clouds and the threat of rain. Zachary frowned at the sky as they broke camp. "Might get wet," he warned. "Best move quickly while the trail's still good." They rode at a faster pace, Rebecca gritting her teeth against the discomfort. By mid-morning, the first drops began to fall, quickly becoming a steady, soaking rain. Zachary led them to a stand of trees that offered minimal shelter. "Here," he said, shrugging out of his duster and holding it out to her. "It's not much, but it'll keep the worst off." Rebecca hesitated, then accepted the coat. It smelled of leather, horses, and pine smoke, not unpleasant. "What about you?" "I've been wet before," he said simply. "Won't melt." They continued through the rain, which eventually slackened to a drizzle. The trail became muddy and treacherous in places, forcing them to proceed with caution. Rebecca's clothing was soon soaked through despite the duster, and she could feel a chill setting in. By late afternoon, she was shivering uncontrollably. Zachary noticed immediately and called a halt. "This isn't working," he said, his expression concerned. "There's a lined shack about a mile east of here, used by cowboys during roundup. We need to get you dry and warm." The shack was little more than a crude shelter, a single room with a small stove, a rough bunk, and a few basic supplies left for travelers in need. But it was dry, and that was all that mattered. Zachary quickly got a fire going in the stove while Rebecca stood shivering by the door. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said matter-of-factly. "I'll tend to the horses and give you privacy. There should be some old blankets in that trunk." True to his word, he disappeared outside after making sure the fire was burning steadily. Rebecca fumbled with her sodden clothing, her fingers stiff with cold. She found 2 scratchy wool blankets in the trunk and wrapped herself in them after stripping down to her chemise and drawers, hanging her dress and petticoats near the stove to dry. When Zachary knocked on the door some time later, she called for him to enter. He carried their saddlebags and a rabbit he'd managed to snare. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, carefully averting his eyes from her state of undress despite the blankets. "Starving," she admitted. He busied himself preparing the rabbit, skinning and cleaning it efficiently before setting it to cook in a battered pot he found on a shelf. The simple task seemed to ease some of the awkwardness of their situation. "Storm's settling in," he observed, glancing toward the small window where rain lashed against the glass. "Might need to stay here tonight." Rebecca nodded, too exhausted and cold to worry about propriety. The baby gave a series of vigorous kicks, as if protesting the day's discomforts. "Is it always this active?" Zachary asked, noticing her hand on her belly. "Especially when I'm trying to rest," Rebecca replied with a rueful smile. "Thomas used to say we had a future prizefighter on our hands." A brief silence fell at the mention of her husband. Rebecca found it didn't hurt quite as much to speak of him now. "Were you married long?" Zachary asked, stirring the pot. "3 years. We came west last spring when Thomas heard about the gold strikes. He was—" She searched for the right words. "He was a dreamer. Always chasing the next opportunity. And you?" "I wanted roots, a home." She looked around the humble shack. "Ironic, isn't it? Now I'm running again." Zachary regarded her thoughtfully. "Sometimes we run from, sometimes toward, makes a difference." The rabbit stew, though simple, was delicious. They ate in companionable silence, the rain providing a steady backdrop to their meal. As Rebecca's clothes dried and her body warmed, she found herself relaxing into the strange intimacy of their situation. "You said yesterday you know what it's like to be hunted," she said suddenly. "What did you mean?" Zachary was quiet so long that Rebecca thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he set aside his empty bowl. "After the war, I rode with a group of men. Not outlaws exactly, but not lawmen either. We did jobs for people who needed, problems solved." His voice was carefully neutral. "One job went wrong, bad information. A family was hurt, a woman and her child. I left after that, but the man who led us Hawkins, he didn't take kindly to desertion. He came after you, twice." Zachary's hand unconsciously touched the scar along his jaw. "He won't try a 3rd time." The implication was clear. Rebecca studied him in the dim light of the shack, trying to reconcile the gentle, honorable man who had helped her with someone capable of the violence his words suggested. "We all have pasts," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Things we regret, can't change them, can only try to do better going forward. Is that what you're doing with me, trying to do better? His gray eyes met hers steadily. Maybe, or maybe I just couldn't turn away a woman in need. The honesty of his answer touched her. For the first time since Thomas's death, Rebecca felt something other than fear or grief, a small, warm flicker of possibility. "Thank you for telling me," she said. He nodded once, then stood to check on their drying clothes. "Your dress should be wearable by morning. Best get some sleep. You take the bunk." "Where will you sleep?" "Floor's fine." Had worse. Rebecca wanted to protest but knew he wouldn't accept any other arrangement. She settled onto the narrow bunk, wrapping the blankets tightly around herself. Despite the hard mattress, she was asleep almost instantly. She woke sometime in the night, momentarily disoriented. The rain still pattered against the roof, but something else had disturbed her sleep. A sound soft but distinct. Zachary sat by the stove, the dying embers casting just enough light for her to make out his profile. He held something small in his hands, turning it over and over. With a start, Rebecca realized it was a child's toy, a small, carved wooden horse. The vulnerability of the moment made her breath catch. Zachary seemed to sense her wakefulness and quickly tucked the toy away. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual. "Yes," Rebecca replied softly. "Just the baby kicking." He nodded and added another small piece of wood to the stove. Neither mentioned what she had seen, but something had shifted between them, a deeper understanding perhaps, or the recognition of shared pain. Rebecca drifted back to sleep with the strange certainty that whatever happened next, she was no longer truly alone. Morning broke clear and cool, the storm having passed during the night. Rebecca dressed in her now dry clothing while Zachary checked on the horses outside. Her body ached from the previous day's journey and the uncomfortable bunk, but she felt stronger somehow, more determined. "Should make Pine Creek by nightfall if we push on," Zachary said when he returned. "How are you feeling?" "Ready to move," Rebecca replied, placing a hand on her lower back and stretching. "The sooner we reach town, the sooner I can figure out what comes next." They ate a quick breakfast of leftover stew and set out as the sun cleared the eastern hills. The rain had transformed the landscape. Wildflowers dotted the prairie in splashes of yellow and purple, and the air smelled fresh and clean. Their conversation flowed more easily now, the shared confidences of the previous night having broken down some of the barriers between them. Zachary spoke of his childhood in Tennessee, his parents' small farm, and his decision to join the Union Army despite living in a divided state. Rebecca told him about growing up in Philadelphia, the daughter of a bookkeeper who insisted she learn his trade despite being a girl. "He was ahead of his time," she said with a fond smile. "Always said, Rebecca, a woman with a skill is never at anyone's mercy." "Wise man," Zachary commented. "My mother was similar, taught herself to read when most women around us couldn't, made sure I could too." The miles passed more quickly with conversation to distract them. By mid-afternoon, the landscape began to change, with more signs of settlement, fenced fields, the occasional distant farmhouse, a well-traveled road. "Pine Creek's just beyond that ridge," Zachary said, pointing ahead. "Once we get there, we should find the doctor first. Make sure everything's all right with the baby after all this travel." Rebecca nodded, suddenly nervous about arriving in town. What would she tell people? How would she explain her situation? As if sensing her anxiety, Zachary added, "We can say you're my sister if you'd prefer. Visiting from back east might be simpler." Rebecca considered the offer. "Your sister wouldn't have a different last name." "Cousin then, or," he hesitated, "we could say you're my wife." The suggestion hung in the air between them. Rebecca studied his face, trying to discern his intentions. That would be a lie, she said carefully. Yes, he met her gaze steadily. But it would give you protection at least until the baby comes and you decide what you want to do. And what would you get from this arrangement? Something like hurt flickered across his features. Nothing you don't want to give. Rebecca felt ashamed of her suspicion. I'm sorry, it's just, you don't trust easily, he finished for her. I understand why. It's just a suggestion, Mrs. Wilson. Think about it. You can decide when we reach town. They rode in silence for a while, Rebecca turning the proposition over in her mind. A pretend marriage would indeed offer protection not just from Virgil if he tracked her down, but from the judgment and gossip of a small town. Yet it would also bind her to this man she barely knew, creating expectations she wasn't sure she could fulfill. As they crested the ridge, Pine Creek came into view below a collection of wooden buildings straddling a creek that gleamed silver in the late afternoon sun. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and Rebecca could make out people moving about the main street. It's bigger than I expected, she remarked. Growing all the time, Zachary replied. Doctor's place is on the north end, white house with green shutters. As they approached the outskirts of town, Rebecca made her decision. Mr. Moore, Zachary, I'm grateful for your offer, truly, but I can't ask you to compromise yourself that way. He glanced at her, expression unreadable. It's not a compromise if it's freely offered, even so. I need to stand on my own 2 feet, for myself and for my child. She straightened in the saddle. I'll face whatever comes as Rebecca Wilson, widow. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. As you wish. They rode into town side by side, drawing curious glances from the townsfolk they passed. Pine Creek was indeed growing. Rebecca counted a general store, a blacksmith, a small church, and what appeared to be a newly built schoolhouse among the various buildings. Zachary led them directly to the doctor's house, a tidy white building with a small sign proclaiming Dr. James Thornton, physician and surgeon. He dismounted first, then helped Rebecca down from her horse, his hands gentle at her waist. The doctor was a surprisingly young man with spectacles and a thoughtful manner. He listened to Rebecca's abbreviated story, recently widowed, traveling to start anew without visible judgment, then examined her thoroughly. The baby seems healthy despite your journey, he pronounced. But you need rest, proper food, and no more long rides until after the birth. You're fortunate another week on the trail might have brought early labor. Relief washed over Rebecca. Zachary, who had waited outside during the examination, stood as she emerged from the doctor's office. All well? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Yes, she assured him, but I need to find lodging right away, doctor's orders. There's a boarding house on Main Street, Zachary said. Mrs. Holcomb runs it, fair prices, clean rooms. They walked their horses through town, Zachary pointing out various establishments along the way. At the boarding house, a large 2-story building with a wraparound porch, they were greeted by a plump, gray-haired woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Room for a single lady, Mrs. Holcomb repeated after hearing Rebecca's request. Her gaze traveled from Rebecca's pregnant state to Zachary and back again, suspicion evident in her expression. My cousin, Zachary explained smoothly. From Pennsylvania. Her husband passed in a mining accident. She's come west to start fresh. The older woman's expression softened slightly. I see. Well, I do have a room available, $5 a week, meals included. She looked at Rebecca appraisingly. Can you pay? Yes, Rebecca said firmly, reaching for her small purse. 2 weeks in advance if you prefer. Mrs. Holcomb nodded, apparently satisfied. Supper's at 6 sharp, no gentlemen callers in the rooms, no alcohol on the premises. She shot a pointed look at Zachary. Family or not? Understood, Rebecca agreed quickly. After arranging for Rebecca's mare to be stabled at the local livery, Zachary walked her back to the boarding house with her small carpet bag of possessions. "What will you do now?" Rebecca asked as they stood on the porch. "Check in with Marshall about those cattle," he replied. "Shouldn't take more than a few days." An awkward silence fell between them. Rebecca realized with a start that she didn't want him to leave. "Will you?" she began, then hesitated. "Will you come back through town before you head home?" Something like hope flickered in his gray eyes. "If you'd like me to, I would." The admission came easier than she expected. "I'd like to thank you properly for all you've done." "No thanks needed." He shifted slightly, seeming almost uncomfortable with her gratitude. "But I'll stop by, check how you're settling in." On impulse, Rebecca extended her hand. Zachary took it, his rough palm warm against hers. The touch lingered a moment longer than necessary before he released her and stepped back. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Wilson, and that little one." "Rebecca," she corrected softly. "Please call me Rebecca." A smile rare and genuine transformed his weathered face. "Rebecca," he repeated. "I'll see you in a few days." She watched him walk away, an unexpected ache forming in her chest. Despite her brave words about standing on her own, the prospect of facing this new town alone suddenly seemed daunting. Mrs. Holcomb appeared beside her. "Handsome man, your cousin," she observed, emphasis on the last word making it clear she doubted their supposed relation. Rebecca chose not to respond directly. "He helped me when I needed it most. I owe him a great deal." The older woman studied her face. "Well, come along then. Let me show you to your room before supper." The following days passed in a blur of adjustment. Rebecca's room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a rocking chair near the window. The boarding house held 5 other residents, 2 elderly sisters who taught at the school, a young clerk from the bank, a widow even older than Mrs. Holcomb, and a traveling salesman who was rarely present. Rebecca quickly established a routine. Mornings were spent resting as the doctor had advised. Afternoons, she ventured into town, familiarizing herself with Pine Creek and its opportunities. The general store owner, Mr. Peterson, seemed interested when she mentioned her bookkeeping experience, though he made no immediate offer of employment. "Have to discuss it with my sister," he explained. "She's been helping since my wife passed, but she's eager to return to her own family in Denver." Rebecca nodded understandingly, hiding her disappointment. She needed work. Her small savings wouldn't last forever, especially with a baby coming. On her 3rd day in town, she encountered Dr. Thornton on the street. After inquiring about her health, he hesitated, then said, "Mrs. Wilson, I hope you won't think me presumptuous, but I may have a solution to your employment situation." "Oh," Rebecca asked, intrigued. "My nurse, Mrs. Greeley, is retiring next month. Moving to Sacramento to live with her daughter." He adjusted his spectacles nervously. "The position requires basic literacy, a steady hand, and a strong stomach. The hours can be irregular, but the pay is decent, and there's a small apartment above my office that comes with the job." Rebecca's heart leaped. "That sounds perfect, doctor, but I have no nursing experience." "You're intelligent and calm under pressure. I could see that during your examination." He smiled slightly. "And Mrs. Greeley could train you before she leaves. As for the baby," he gestured to her belly, "many of my patients bring their children when they come to help. I see no reason why my nurse can't do the same." It seemed almost too good to be true. "When would you need an answer?" "Take a few days to consider," Dr. Thornton suggested. "Perhaps speak with Mrs. Greeley. She's usually at the office in the mornings." Rebecca thanked him profusely, her mind already racing with possibilities. The prospect of having both employment and housing before the baby arrived seemed like a miracle, one she desperately needed. That evening at supper, she found herself watching the door, hoping Zachary might appear. Mrs. Holcomb noticed her distraction. "Expecting someone?" the landlady asked as she served slices of apple pie. "Just wondering about my cousin," Rebecca replied, forcing casualness into her tone. "He mentioned he might stop by before leaving the area." Mrs. Holcomb's knowing expression suggested she wasn't fooled by the cousin's story, but she merely said, "Men's business often takes longer than they expect, especially out here." Later, alone in her room, Rebecca sat in the rocking chair by the window, gazing out at the moonlit street. She found herself missing Zachary's quiet presence, his straightforward manner, the feeling of safety she'd experienced in his company. It was foolish, she knew, to form an attachment so quickly, especially given her circumstances. The baby kicked vigorously, as if responding to her thoughts. "Yes, I know," she murmured, stroking her belly. "We need to focus on practical matters. Dr. Thornton's offer is a blessing we can't ignore." Yet as she prepared for bed, she couldn't help wondering where Zachary was tonight, and whether he was thinking of her too. The following morning, Rebecca visited the doctor's office and met Mrs. Greeley, a brisk, efficient woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair and surprisingly gentle hands. The nurse showed her around the facilities, explaining the various duties involved in her position. "It's not for the faint-hearted," Mrs. Greeley warned. "You'll see things that would make most ladies swoon: broken bones, festering wounds, difficult births. But there's satisfaction in the work. Real satisfaction. I'm not easily disturbed," Rebecca assured her, "and I learn quickly." The older woman studied her appraisingly. "You'll need to be on your feet for long hours sometimes, with the baby coming." "I'm stronger than I look," Rebecca said firmly. "And I need this position, Mrs. Greeley. For myself and my child." Something like approval flickered in the nurse's eyes. "Well then, come back tomorrow morning. We'll start your training with inventory and record keeping. If that goes well, we'll move on to bandaging techniques and basic medicines." Rebecca left the doctor's office feeling more hopeful than she had in months. The position seemed perfect, challenging but manageable, with the enormous benefit of housing included. The small apartment above the office was simple but far more spacious than her room at the boarding house, with a separate bedroom, a kitchen area, and even a small sitting room. As she walked back toward the boarding house, her attention was caught by the sound of horses approaching from the west. A group of riders entered the main street, cowboys returning from some task, dust-covered and weary-looking. Her heart quickened as she scanned their faces, looking for Zachary. He rode at the rear of the group, his broad-brimmed hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. Rebecca found herself holding her breath as the men approached, torn between the impulse to call out and the propriety that held her silent. Zachary happened to glance in her direction as they passed. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by something warmer. He broke away from the group, guiding his horse toward where she stood. "Mrs. Wilson," he greeted her formally, tipping his hat. Then, more softly, "Rebecca." "Mr. Moore," she returned with a small smile. "I see you've completed your business." "Just finished moving those cattle," he confirmed, dismounting to stand beside her. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his features, the several days' growth of beard on his jaw. "How are you settling in?" "Well," she replied. "Very well, actually. I may have found employment and housing with Dr. Thornton. His nurse is retiring, and he's offered to train me as her replacement." Genuine pleasure lit his eyes. "That's excellent news." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, aware of curious glances from passers-by. Finally, Zachary cleared his throat. "I should get cleaned up. Been in the saddle 3 days straight." He hesitated. "Would you allow me to call on you properly this evening? Perhaps take supper at the hotel restaurant. The invitation surprised her, though not unpleasantly. Mrs. Holcomb serves supper at 6. After that, then, he suggested. 7 o'clock, just to talk, he added quickly. I'd like to hear more about this position with the doctor. Rebecca found herself nodding. Yes, I'd like that. Another rare smile transformed his face. I'll come by the boarding house at 7 then. As she watched him lead his horse toward the livery, Rebecca felt a flutter that had nothing to do with the baby. She pushed the feeling aside, reminding herself firmly that her focus needed to remain on securing her future, not entertaining romantic notions about a man she barely knew, no matter how kind or honorable he might be. When she returned to the boarding house, Mrs. Holcomb informed her that a man had been asking questions about her in town that morning. Described a red-haired woman, pregnant, traveling alone, the landlady said, watching Rebecca's face carefully. Said he was family, looking to reunite. Cold fear washed over Rebecca. Did he give a name? Called himself Wilson. Said he was a brother-in-law. Mrs. Holcomb's shrewd eyes narrowed. I told him I mind my own business and don't know every stranger passing through. But Pine Creek isn't that big, my dear. If he's still looking, he'll find you eventually. Rebecca sank into a chair, one protective hand going to her belly. He's dangerous, she whispered. He believes terrible things about me, about my baby. Mrs. Holcomb's expression softened. I thought as much. That's why I sent him to Willow Creek, said I'd heard tell of a red-haired woman headed that direction. She patted Rebecca's shoulder. It won't fool him long, but it might buy you some time. Thank you, Rebecca said fervently. I should leave. I can't bring trouble to your door. Nonsense, the older woman replied firmly. This is precisely why I came west 30 years ago, to get away from a man who thought he owned me. She smoothed her apron with an air of finality. You'll stay right here while we figure this out, and I think your cousin should be informed immediately. Rebecca nodded, her mind racing. Virgil's appearance changed everything. The peaceful future she'd begun to envision in Pine Creek now seemed like a fragile dream, ready to shatter at any moment. After a hurried supper, during which she could barely eat, Rebecca changed into her one good dress, a dark blue calico that somewhat disguised her pregnancy, and waited anxiously for Zachary's arrival. When Mrs. Holcomb showed him into the small parlor, Rebecca was struck by the transformation. Clean-shaven, dressed in a fresh shirt and vest, with his dark hair neatly combed, he looked younger and somehow more approachable. His expression darkened immediately when he saw her distress. What's happened? Rebecca quickly explained about Virgil's inquiries in town. Zachary listened intently, his jaw tightening as she described Mrs. Holcomb's clever misdirection. He won't be fooled for long, he said grimly. Men like that, they're persistent. I know. Rebecca twisted her hands in her lap. I should leave Pine Creek. I can't risk bringing danger to these people who have been so kind. And go where? Zachary asked gently. In your condition, with winter coming, the reality of her situation hit Rebecca anew. She was trapped by her pregnancy, by her limited resources, by Virgil's determination to find her. There must be another way, Zachary said, his voice firm. A way for you to stay safely. Rebecca looked up at him, noting the determination in his gray eyes. What do you suggest? He was quiet for a moment, seemingly wrestling with a decision. Finally, he met her gaze directly. Marry me, he said simply. Rebecca stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What? Not pretend this time. Really marry me. He leaned forward, his expression intense. Virgil claims the baby isn't his brother's. If you're my wife, the child becomes mine in the eyes of the law. He'd have no claim, no right to pursue you. But we barely know each other, Rebecca protested, her heart racing. You can't possibly want, I know enough, Zachary interrupted. I know you're brave, resourceful, and determined to protect your child at any cost. I know you don't look at me with pity or disgust when I mention my past." He hesitated. "And I know that in the few days since we met, I've thought of little else but you." The raw honesty in his voice took her breath away. "Zachary, you don't have to love me," he continued quickly, "or even share my bed if you don't wish it. But as my wife, you'd have protection, legal and physical. No one would question the baby's parentage. You could still work with the doctor if you wanted or not. The choice would be yours. And what would you gain from this arrangement?" Rebecca asked, echoing her question from days earlier. This time his answer was different. "A chance," he said quietly. "A chance at the kind of life I never thought I'd have again. A family, a purpose beyond myself." Rebecca studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She found none, only a vulnerable honesty that touched something deep within her. "This is madness," she whispered. "Perhaps," he acknowledged with the ghost of a smile. "But sometimes madness is the most sensible option." Despite herself, Rebecca laughed, a sound of surprise and something like relief. "You're serious about this, aren't you? Completely?" His expression sobered. "I don't make offers I don't intend to honor, Rebecca. If you accept, I'll be a husband to you in whatever way you need, and a father to your child, if you'll allow it." The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly vigorous kick. Rebecca placed her hand over the movement, a gesture that had become automatic. Without thinking, she reached for Zachary's hand and placed it beside hers. His eyes widened as he felt the baby's movements. Something like wonder crossed his features, an expression so genuine, so unguarded, that Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. "I can't ask this of you," she said softly. "You didn't ask, I offered." He kept his hand on her belly, seemingly mesmerized by the life beneath his palm. "Say yes, Rebecca. Let me help you. Let me protect you both." In that moment, looking at this man who had already risked so much for her without asking anything in return, Rebecca made her decision. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something equally powerful: trust. For the first time since Thomas's death, she trusted someone completely. "Yes," she said simply. The wedding took place 2 days later in Pine Creek's small church. Rebecca wore her blue calico dress with wildflowers in her hair, gathered by Mrs. Holcomb's young grandson that morning. Zachary wore his best shirt and a new vest purchased from the general store. Dr. Thornton stood as witness, along with Mrs. Holcomb and Mrs. Greeley. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary's kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise rather than a demand. Mrs. Holcomb hosted a small reception at the boarding house, where the residents offered congratulations and good wishes. News of the hasty wedding had spread quickly through town, accompanied by the inevitable gossip, but Rebecca found she cared less than expected. The gold band on her finger provided a shield of respectability that allowed most to overlook the circumstances. Later that evening, they moved Rebecca's few possessions to Dr. Thornton's apartment above the medical office. The doctor had insisted they take it immediately, rather than waiting for Mrs. Greeley's departure. "Consider it a wedding gift," he said with a kind smile. "Besides, it's closer to my practice in case the baby decides to arrive early." The apartment, though small, felt luxurious after the boarding house room. Rebecca moved about the space, arranging her belongings and the few household items Mrs. Holcomb had contributed as wedding presents. Zachary watched her from the doorway, a curious expression on his face. "Is it suitable?" he asked. "It's perfect," she assured him, suddenly aware of the awkwardness of their situation. They were legally married, alone together for the first time as husband and wife, yet virtually strangers. He seemed to sense her discomfort. "I'll make up a bed in the sitting room," he said, indicating the small sofa near the window, relief mingled with an unexpected disappointment. "You don't have to. I want you to be comfortable," he interrupted gently. "This marriage may have started unusually, but I meant what I said, Rebecca. It will be whatever you need it to be." His consideration touched her deeply. "Thank you." As they prepared for their first night as a married couple, Rebecca found herself studying Zachary surreptitiously, the careful way he moved about the small space, the gentleness with which he handled their few possessions, the respect he showed for her boundaries. She wondered what it might be like to truly be his wife in every sense, to know the touch of his hands on her skin, to wake beside him each morning. The thought brought a warmth to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the small stove heating the apartment. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Rebecca listened to the soft sounds of Zachary settling on the sofa in the next room. There was comfort in his presence, even separated by a wall. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without fear dogging her dreams. The following weeks established a new routine. Rebecca began her training with Mrs. Greeley in earnest, quickly proving herself capable despite her advanced pregnancy. Zachary found work with several local ranchers, his skills as a horseman and cattleman in high demand. They settled into a domestic partnership marked by growing comfort and mutual respect. Each evening, they shared supper at the small table in their apartment, discussing their days and gradually revealing more of themselves to each other. Rebecca learned that Zachary had lost his wife and infant son to fever during the war, while he was away fighting a tragedy that had haunted him ever since. He carried their photographs in a small tin, which he finally showed her one night, his voice rough with emotion as he described the family he had lost. "Elizabeth was a schoolteacher," he said, gazing at the faded image of a serious-looking young woman, "smart as a whip and twice as stubborn. The boy was just 6 months old when the fever took them both. I wasn't there, didn't even know until I came home on leave 3 months later." Rebecca's heart ached for him. "Is that why you carried the toy horse I saw?" He nodded, seemingly unsurprised that she'd noticed. "Carved it while I was away, never got to give it to him." He carefully closed the tin. "Kept it as a reminder, I suppose, of what I lost, of why I needed to be better than I was after the war." In turn, Rebecca shared more about her life with Thomas, both the good early years and the increasing distance that had grown between them as gold fever consumed him. "He changed," she explained one evening as they sat by the small stove. "Became obsessed with striking it rich. Some nights he wouldn't come home at all, just stayed at the claim. When I told him about the baby, he seemed almost disappointed, as if it were an inconvenience." Zachary's expression darkened. "No child should be considered an inconvenience." "No," she agreed softly. "But I understand now that Thomas was running from something, perhaps the failure of his dreams, or the responsibilities of a growing family. The accident happened 3 weeks after I told him about the baby, and his brother immediately accused you of infidelity." Zachary's tone held barely controlled anger. Rebecca nodded. "Virgil never approved of me, thought Thomas could have done better than a bookkeeper's daughter, when the assay report came back showing the claim was valuable after all." She shrugged. "It gave him the perfect opportunity to try to take everything." Zachary reached across the table and took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "He won't succeed, I promise you that." The sincerity in his voice warmed her, as did the steady pressure of his hand on hers. These small touches had become more frequent between them, a hand at her back as they walked, fingers brushing as they passed items at the table, the occasional embrace when one of them returned home after a long day. Each contact seemed to build a bridge across the circumstances that had brought them together, creating something new and unexpectedly precious. As her pregnancy advanced, Rebecca found herself increasingly grateful for Zachary's presence. He insisted on taking over the more strenuous household tasks, carried water up the stairs to spare her the effort, and even learned to cook simple meals from Mrs. Holcomb when Rebecca was too exhausted after a day at the doctor's office. One evening in her 8th month, Rebecca emerged from washing up to find Zachary kneeling beside the bed, assembling a small wooden cradle. "Where did that come from?" she asked, surprised. He looked up, a hint of shyness in his expression. "Made it. Been working on it at the Johnson place when I had spare time." He ran a hand over the smooth wood. Thought the little one might need a proper place to sleep. The simple gesture undid her completely. Tears welled in her eyes as she crossed the room to inspect his handiwork. The cradle was beautifully crafted, with gentle curves and even a small carved design along the headboard, wild roses intertwined with oak leaves. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over the carving. "Thank you." "It's nothing," he murmured, clearly embarrassed by her emotional response. "No," Rebecca said firmly, taking his hand. "It's everything." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them. The careful distance they'd maintained despite their growing closeness suddenly seemed unnecessary, even unwanted. Rebecca leaned forward, her heart pounding, and pressed her lips to his. Zachary remained still for a heartbeat, then responded with gentle fervor, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. The kiss deepened, awakening sensations Rebecca had almost forgotten: desire, yearning, the sweet ache of wanting someone who wanted you in return. When they finally parted, both breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "Rebecca," he murmured, her name a question and a prayer. "I want to be your wife," she whispered, "in every way." That night, they truly became husband and wife, discovering each other with tender exploration and growing passion. Zachary's touch was reverent, careful of her condition yet attuned to her desires. Rebecca found herself responding with an abandon that surprised her, her body arching into his caresses, her heart opening to possibilities she'd never imagined when she'd agreed to this marriage of convenience. Afterward, lying in his arms, Rebecca felt a contentment that went beyond physical satisfaction. This man, this unexpected gift in her life, had become more than a protector or a convenient solution to her problems. He had become essential. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she confessed into the darkness, her cheek pressed against his chest where she could hear the steady beating of his heart. His arms tightened around her. "I think I fell in love with you the moment you said you didn't trust strangers," he replied, a smile in his voice. "Your courage, your determination, they humbled me, Rebecca, made me want to be worthy of your trust." "You are," she assured him, raising herself on one elbow to look into his face. "More than worthy." The following weeks were the happiest of Rebecca's life, despite the continued threat of Virgil's return and the increasing discomforts of late pregnancy. She and Zachary settled into a true marriage, sharing not just their bed but their hopes and plans for the future. "What will we name the baby?" Zachary asked one evening as they sat on the small porch outside their apartment, watching the sunset. Rebecca glanced at him, touched by the "we" in his question. "I hadn't decided. If it's a boy, I thought perhaps James, after my father." "James is a good name," Zachary agreed. "And if it's a girl," Rebecca smiled. "I was thinking Elizabeth." Emotion crossed his face, surprise followed by deep gratitude. "You would do that, name her after?" "After your first wife, yes." Rebecca took his hand. "She was part of what made you the man you are, the man I've come to love. I think it would be a beautiful tribute." Zachary pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "What did I do to deserve you? You earned my trust," she replied simply. "One day at a time." As Rebecca's due date approached, Dr. Thornton insisted she reduce her hours at the office, though she continued to help with record-keeping and simple preparations. Mrs. Greeley had departed for Sacramento, confident that Rebecca would manage the position admirably once she'd recovered from childbirth. December arrived with a dusting of snow and preparations for Christmas. Pine Creek embraced the holiday spirit with evergreen boughs decorating the storefronts and plans for a community celebration at the church. Rebecca and Zachary purchased modest gifts for each other and discussed how they would celebrate their first Christmas as a family. The baby, however, had other plans. 2 weeks before Christmas and a week before her due date, Rebecca woke in the night with the unmistakable sensation of her waters breaking. Zachary, instantly alert, helped her change into a dry nightgown before rushing downstairs to wake Dr. Thornton. The labor progressed too quickly for a first birth, according to the doctor. By dawn, Rebecca was fully dilated and fighting the urge to push while Zachary held her hand, his face a mask of concern and wonder. "You're doing beautifully," Dr. Thornton encouraged. "The baby's head is crowning. One more good push, Mrs. Moore." Rebecca bore down with all her remaining strength, a cry tearing from her throat as she felt the baby slide from her body. A moment of silence, then a robust wail filled the room. "A girl," the doctor announced, placing the squalling infant on Rebecca's chest. "And a healthy one at that." Rebecca gazed down at the tiny, red-faced creature, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Elizabeth," she whispered, touching the damp curls on the baby's head. "Elizabeth Grace Moore." She looked up at Zachary, expecting to see joy on his face. Instead, she saw stark terror. He was staring not at the baby but at the doorway behind Dr. Thornton. "Well, ain't this touching?" drawled a familiar voice. "My brother's widow and her bastard." Virgil Wilson stood in the doorway, a revolver pointed at Zachary's back. How he had found them, how he had entered without anyone hearing, none of that mattered in the moment of pure horror that froze Rebecca's blood. "Get away from her," Virgil ordered Zachary. "Now." Zachary moved slowly, deliberately positioning himself between the gun and the bed where Rebecca lay with the newborn. "She's my wife," he said, his voice steady despite the danger. "And that's my daughter you're threatening." Virgil's laugh was ugly. "Nice try. Town gossip says you married her less than 3 months ago. That baby wasn't made yesterday." He gestured with the gun. "Move aside. My business is with her and what's mine by rights." "Nothing here belongs to you," Zachary replied, not budging. "The claim, the child, none of it." Rebecca clutched Elizabeth closer, terror and exhaustion making her light-headed. Dr. Thornton had moved to the far side of the room, edging toward a cabinet where Rebecca knew he kept a small derringer. "Virgil," she said, trying to keep his attention away from the doctor's movements. "Your brother would be ashamed of you. Thomas wanted this baby. He wanted me to have a future if anything happened to him." "Liar," Virgil spat. "Thomas told me he had doubts, said you'd been distant, secretive. He suspected you had a lover." He waved the gun dangerously. "Then suddenly he's dead, and you're running with his gold and a belly full of someone else's brat." Rebecca felt rage replace her fear. "That's not true. Thomas was the one who changed, not me. He was obsessed with that claim, spent nights away from home." She glared at him. "You're just using his death to take what you always wanted, his success." Virgil's face contorted with fury. "Shut your mouth, woman. I'm taking what's rightfully mine, the deed to the claim, and enough money to make up for your lies." He aimed the gun directly at her. "Where is it? Where's the deed?" Before Rebecca could respond, several things happened at once. Dr. Thornton lunged for his cabinet. Virgil swung toward the movement. and Zachary, seizing the moment of distraction, threw himself at the intruder. The gun discharged with a deafening roar. Rebecca screamed, clutching Elizabeth to her chest as the baby wailed in terror. The two men crashed to the floor, struggling for control of the weapon. A second shot rang out. Then silence. Rebecca held her breath, unable to see which man had prevailed in the struggle. Then Zachary rose slowly to his feet, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead but otherwise intact. Virgil lay motionless on the floor, the doctor's derringer lying beside Zachary's boot. Dr. Thornton knelt quickly beside Virgil, checking for signs of life. After a moment he looked up and shook his head. "He's gone," the doctor said quietly, "shot through the heart." Zachary staggered to the bed, his face ashen. "Rebecca, the baby, are you hurt?" "We're fine," she assured him, tears streaming down her face. "We're both fine." He collapsed beside the bed, one bloodied hand reaching out to touch Elizabeth's tiny head with infinite gentleness. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered. "Both of you." Dr. Thornton moved efficiently, checking Rebecca and the baby while Zachary washed the blood from his face and hands. The sheriff arrived shortly thereafter, alerted by neighbors who had heard the gunshots. After taking statements from all three adults, he determined that the shooting was clearly self-defense and removed Virgil's body for burial. When they were finally alone again, Zachary sat carefully on the edge of the bed, gazing down at Rebecca and Elizabeth with an expression of wonder and profound relief. "It's over," he said simply. "He can't threaten you, either of you, ever again." Rebecca took his hand and placed it gently on their daughter's back, feeling the rapid rise and fall of the infant's breathing. "You saved us." "We saved each other," he corrected softly. "From the moment you rode up to my cabin, exhausted and defiant." A smile touched his lips. "The pregnant woman who didn't trust strangers." "And the cowboy who earned it," Rebecca finished, returning his smile through her tears. Elizabeth stirred between them, her tiny face scrunching in what would become a familiar prelude to hunger. As Rebecca adjusted her nightgown to feed the baby, Zachary watched with undisguised fascination. "She's perfect," he murmured. "She is," Rebecca agreed, stroking the infant's cheek as she latched on. "And she's ours, Zachary, truly ours." The realization seemed to overwhelm him. "I never thought I'd have this again, a family, a child." He touched Elizabeth's tiny hand, marveling when her fingers curled reflexively around his. "You've given me back something I thought was lost forever." "And you've given me a future I never dared imagine," Rebecca replied, her heart full to bursting with love for this man and their daughter. "A home, safety, love. Always," he promised, leaning forward to kiss her gently. "For as long as I live." Spring came early to Pine Creek in 1876. As the snow melted and wildflowers began to dot the prairies, Rebecca stood on the porch of their new home, a small ranch Zachary had purchased with the proceeds from Thomas's claim, which Rebecca had indeed carried with her in a hidden pocket of her petticoat. After Virgil's death, the claim had been legally confirmed as Rebecca's inheritance, and she had chosen to sell it rather than hold onto the painful reminder of her first husband's obsession. The ranch was modest, a sturdy house, a barn, and enough land to run a small herd of cattle. Zachary had named it Wildflower Ranch, in honor of the blooms Rebecca had worn in her hair on their wedding day. Elizabeth, now 4 months old, gurgled happily in Rebecca's arms as they watched Zachary mending a fence in the near pasture. The baby had her mother's red hair and her father's gray eyes, though whether that was coincidence or proof that Thomas's blood ran in her veins, no one could say. To Zachary, it made no difference. From the moment of her birth, Elizabeth had been his daughter in every way that mattered. Rebecca still worked part-time with Dr. Thornton, taking Elizabeth with her to the office 3 days a week. The arrangement suited everyone. The doctor retained his capable nurse. Rebecca maintained her independence, and Zachary had regular time alone with his daughter when he wasn't working the ranch. Their life together wasn't perfect. They had disagreements, moments of doubt, days when the past cast shadows on their happiness. But each challenge only seemed to strengthen the bond between them, a bond forged in desperate circumstances, but tempered by genuine love and respect. As if sensing her thoughts, Zachary looked up from his work and waved. Rebecca waved back, a smile spreading across her face as he abandoned his task and started toward the house. "Taking a break," she called as he approached. "Thought my girls might like to go for a ride," he replied, climbing the porch steps to join them. "It's too fine a day to spend it all working." He kissed her lightly, then took Elizabeth from her arms, lifting the baby high above his head to her squealing delight. The sight of them together, this strong, gentle man and their daughter, filled Rebecca's heart with contentment. Later, as they rode across their land with Elizabeth securely strapped to Zachary's chest, Rebecca marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From desperate strangers to reluctant companions to passionate lovers to true partners, each step had seemed unlikely, even impossible at the time. Yet here they were, building a life together on the foundation of trust they had established one day at a time. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Rebecca smiled, reaching across to take his hand. "About trust, about how sometimes the most unpredictable journeys lead us exactly where we need to be." He returned her smile, squeezing her hand gently. "And are you where you need to be, Rebecca Moore?" She looked at him, at the love shining in his eyes, at their daughter sleeping peacefully against his chest, at the home they had created together against all odds, and knew the answer with absolute certainty. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm exactly where I need to be, where I want to be, with you." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Rebecca and Zachary rode side by side, their hands still linked, their future stretching before them like the vast, promising horizon, a future built on trust earned and love freely given, one precious day at a time.